Hey there, and welcome to Undoing We, Divorce and Life Conversations on WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network, radio, podcast, and TV. I'm your host, Mardi Winder-Adams. I'm a divorce coach, a mediator, and someone who's been through exactly what you're going through. This show is all about helping you get through the tough stuff, the overwhelm of divorce, the what now moments, and the messiness of trying to rebuild your life. We're going to talk about real life challenges, share expert advice, and give you practical tools you can use to move forward with your life. Are you ready to start shifting from we to me? Grab a coffee, sit back, and let's get started. Hello, and I hope you are having an absolutely spectacular day, because today we're going to talk about a really interesting topic and something that I find as a divorce coach. I am not a relationship coach. So I just want to say that right out front. I do help people get on their feet after the divorce, but I don't deal with relationship issues. One of the things I think is fascinating, though, is how people repeat patterns of relationships. Now, when they're healthy patterns and they're good relationships, we don't need to worry about it. But if we find ourselves constantly seeming to get into relationships with the same type of person, a person that's cold, or a person that is a high conflict partner, or a person that is just really emotionally unavailable or distant to us when we really want that sense of closeness and security. And even things like people who are more comfortable with physical signs of affection. It's not the same as love languages. Don't get me wrong on that one, but it is about the type of partner we bring in. And a really interesting approach to looking at this is called attachment theory. So I have an expert on the show that I talked with. It's been a few months now, but I thought our conversation was so fascinating about this whole theory of attachment that I really thought this would be a great topic to talk about on Undoing We today. So I want to introduce you to Mara Palermo. She is a relationship coach specializing in helping high achievers break free from those anxious and avoidant attachment patterns to create a really secure, healthy, and wonderfully fulfilling relationship moving forward. Mara uses a specific framework that helps people identify things like boundaries and intimacy, identity, balance, and even how they communicate with partners to get a more deeper understanding of themselves so that they are then able to monitor any possible negative influences that are coming in to how they are choosing a partner, but also to allow people to feel really empowered if they have been through something like a divorce and now are getting back out into the dating field and they're thinking, wow, I'd like to start dating again, but I noticed that I've got this pattern and I seem to be bringing these people into my life. So she really works with you to help understand yourself so that you are better positioned to go out and find your next really positive relationship. So on the Going Solo Network, I thought this was a perfect topic, whether you are recently single or whether you have been single for a while and now are considering getting back in the dating world, maybe because you just don't want to go through that same old negative cycle that maybe you've experienced more than one time in your life before. So listening to this really, it's a really brief, but I think it's a really interesting idea about this whole attachment theory. And we talk about the 4 types of attachment. And then Mara shares a little bit about what that means to be in a relationship with a partner like that and how you can strategically start placing yourself and making changes so that you are changing your attachment way so that you attract different partners. Stay tuned because this is a really interesting conversation. I know that we're going to talk a little bit about attachment styles today.
Yes.
And can you tell, because I know there's kind of four main attachment styles, right? Or are there more? Tell us a little bit about them and what they are.
Yeah. So essentially, an attachment style or attachment theory, it basically is the way that we emotionally attach and form these bonds to people that represent kind of how we were bonding with our caregivers in our early years. And so basically when we become adults, we're almost recreating our childhood through these attachment wounds, right? Or these attachment styles. And so when you think of attachment styles, I think of it as like a spectrum. So I always tell people, it's like when we uncover what it is, it's not like a diagnosis. It's not like you're stuck with it. It's just understanding where you're at, right? So if you think of a spectrum, well, one end of the spectrum is the anxious attachment style. And so when you think of the anxious attachment style, they essentially they all have like deeper wounds. That's why it's creating this attachment. And that one is really the fear of being abandoned. So they want to feel loved. They're the ones that are afraid to be alone. They really want people to like them and need that constant validation, reassurance. And because they're just so afraid of being alone that they'll tend to quote unquote cling onto people, right? They're needy. They're the love addicts. They're the ones that always need to, they can never be alone. And so you can see where if you have that fear underneath everything, why they would show up in that way.
Right.
And so that starts to create that codependency because we're constantly looking for others for validation, or we don't really have a sense of self. So it's kind of like, this person over here, I need that validation for my self-worth, basically.
Right.
And so if you think of like the other end of the spectrum, which is like totally at the other end, which is like polar opposite, is the dismissive avoidant. And so the dismissive avoidant is very much the opposite. They have the fear of vulnerability. They think it's weak, right? They don't really know how, they probably were neglected emotionally. So they kind of stuffed their feelings aside and figured, you know what, I'll just figure it out of myself. Kind of, they become the hyper independent person where it's like, I really don't need anybody. I kind of can do my thing. And so when they're in relationship, their biggest fear is that the relationship is going to take away my independence. Right. So they want to, they will get into relationships, but they're slower to move into relationships. It takes a longer time for them to develop emotions towards the person. And they almost feel like, people will say like they feel a little bit like withdrawn, or there's always that distance that's there because they're so afraid to get closer. They don't really know how to be honest.
Right.
And so you can see where essentially when this is a very common dynamic in relationships, because one is very anxious, one is like, avoidant. And so this person who's more anxious is clinging on to, every little crumb, let's say, that they're giving them because they're just like, please love me. And they're chasing him. But at the same sense, it's actually pushing them further away because they don't know how to handle all that emotion and vulnerability, etc.
Right.
So then there's the third one, which is the fearful avoidant. Other people, it's also called like disorganized. And so essentially it's both. So they have a lot of a variance of anxious and dismissive. So they can be the people that are real hot and, heavy, and then pull back real fast because, they desire that closeness. They want that connection, but they fear it at the same time.
Right.
And usually they're coming from that place of, maybe in their care, like what their caregiver was maybe they didn't know how they were going to show up. They could have been very in a chaotic household. They could have, they could have been, maybe they were a drug addict, or they were, addicted, or even an alcoholic. And so 1 second mom could be one way, 1 second she's another way. Right. And so their caregiver is their source of fear and love at the same time. And so their biggest core wound is trust. So they don't know how to trust people because they weren't sure how to trust their caregiver, that they would show up consistently for them. So that's where it's like, oh, I really love this. I really want this. And then something can come up, or they get closer and they pull back and they could ghost someone. And that's when they're like, I don't know, everything seems great. And then all of a sudden they ghosted me. Right.
Right.
So it's that's like push pull. It's that hot and cold. So there's that. And you can have a little bit of both, but all of the things, but if you could lean more towards one is usually pretty dominant, right? And then the fourth one is the secure attached. So the securely attached is obviously someone who doesn't necessarily have these deep wounds, right? And they're able to they're more emotionally balanced, they're grounded, they can resolve conflict. They don't think of conflict as, they think of it as more of an opportunity of growth, not, problem. They can express their needs. They don't mind being vulnerable. And if something really isn't working out for them, they probably will just leave the situation. Right.
Right.
And so because they had more of that consistency throughout their childhood, or they had their caregivers very attuned to their emotions and to what they needed, that's why they were able to be, that way. So that's why I say, like, depending on where you're at, it's just kind of a knowing of like, okay, this is where I'm at and this is why. But the idea is, as I'm working with clients, is to move them into more of the securely attached
right
place. Yes.
Yeah. And thank you for that detailed explanation, because I think it's really, we hear a lot of terms get thrown around, and I try hard not to, diagnose people, or I definitely encourage my clients, don't try to diagnose your ex. So, if people use a lot of labels nowadays, like narcissist or yes, borderline personality, or schizophrenic, or not sociopath or psychopath, or, people throw these terms out like they're just everyday language. They're really not. And no, you can have an attachment. And as a matter of fact, I mean, some of those cluster B personality things do come with attachment disorder issues. But you can have an attachment disorder and not have everybody has something, right? Everybody has an attachment style. And so you can have one of the, you can find times in your life, I think, even, right, where you might be more avoidant, or you might be more fearful. And then if you meet the right person, you could move more to the secure as you evolve and work on yourself. So is that true, Mara? Is that is that accurate? Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's what I say, like, most of the time, your attachment style is like developed by, say, like age 2, right? I mean, it's very early on. And like, to your point, you could, be in say your parents are married and then they get divorced and then maybe they remarried, like, and this new person comes in and you can change your attachment style, right? And even as adults, someone who is fearful, avoidant, let's say, and that might really bring out your anxious side, because if they shut down a lot, and that will create some sense of like being abandoned, right? So that could also come out. And usually, like you said, if you're with someone who's a bit more securely attached, it also can create that space for you to become that, or to become more, healthy, because you're around that person who is a bit healthier in terms of navigating through relationships, right? So that's why I always say, like, it's a spectrum, and you can be one way, you could be another way. I oftentimes will work sometimes with women who are, say they're single, and they have their own business and they're great and they love their life, but they're like, I really want to find a person. Or when they do find a person, then all of a sudden it's like they can't even function practically, because now they have all this anxiety and this relationship stuff coming up, right? And so that really wasn't activated until they got into a relationship, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So it depends.
And I think that, like you said, it's watching for those patterns and noticing them when they're developing, and then realizing that you can make those changes. And I think that's what's so positive about this, that, you can make changes. You can recognize why you're making specific choices in relationships. I've heard, now this may not be true, but the avoidant and the fearful, when they kind of come together, that's really the most difficult relationship to negotiate, right? Because to navigate, because they are so opposite. And I may be saying this too strongly, but it seems to me that those two styles tend to play off each other's worst aspects rather than their best aspects. Is that Is that what you found?
Yeah. I feel like because what happens is, especially if you're anxiously attached and you're not really aware of it, you really feel when you're on that dismissive side and you are, let's say, not communicating regularly or you're shutting down or whatever. I mean, it is just triggering that abandonment wound, right? It's triggering that. And they don't realize that it has nothing to do with them and everything to do with the way that they are. And so what is that? What do they make it mean? They make it mean they don't love me, they don't care about me. And so then it just starts the cycle and it goes even deeper. And so what happens sometimes with that too is that they're trying even harder, right? Because it's like, how much harder can I try to earn my love and like prove to them like, hey, pay attention to me, or, you know, because they're needing that constant reassurance, where in all reality, what's happening is like with the dismissive, it's like they really just don't have that capacity. And vulnerability is just so terrifying to them that it's like, it just pushes them down into, you know, their little shell, and they have no idea how to kind of like come out of it. And so that it just keeps reinforcing the cycle, pushing them further away. And then they're coming closer to them and they don't really know how to navigate it until almost like one of them's just exhausted at some point, or they're just like, I can't take this anymore, that type of thing. Right. So yeah, I've seen that quite a bit.
And if you are, let's say you've noticed in your last several relationships, you've seen this pattern. What's one simple thing, or maybe there's no simple thing, but what's one good starting point for people if they realize they're in some unhealthy, or if they feel there's, let's say they are constantly chasing, needing approval, wanting more from the other person. Let's say I recognize that. What's one thing that I can start working on to help myself with that?
Well, I think it's understanding that one is like becoming aware of these things, right? Once we become aware, it's great. And I know, like, even when I'm working with someone who's a bit more anxious, let's say, for example, when I uncover some of these wounds that, you know, that they have to, like, oh my God, I didn't realize, right? I didn't realize even that this is the reason why this is happening. And so then from there, it's recognizing that we are creating a lot of these stories. And I always say, you know, when we are getting activated, if we're like, oh my God, these patterns, and I'm feeling this way, it's because we're feeling unsafe, right? There's a safety we're feeling unsafe in ourselves, in other people. And that's the one core wound I would say that like all of them have the I am unsafe. That's what's going on. And so when we start to get activated and we start to pay attention to these patterns, like one of the thing is we really need to start to self-soothe. Self-soothing is something that is huge that can help someone who's like more anxious, because they feel like they're very expressive, or they're like, I gotta like cling on to people. I gotta share everything. I gotta tell them everything. And it's like, but at some time sometimes we just need to sit within ourselves, and whether it's meditations or whether it's like tapping or something to just bring us back down to like center, and understanding that oftentimes we're creating stories and these narratives in our head, because when this person outside of here is doing one X, Y, and Z, we make it mean that we're not lovable. We make it mean they're going to leave. We feel that this is what's happening. But in reality, it's like, maybe they didn't call you back because they were busy. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So not because they're going to leave, not because there's someone else, not because they don't love you. It's just because, like, what else is possible other than the fact that blank? And usually it's because they feel like they don't feel lovable. They don't feel like this person's, they're going to leave them. And so that's what they're clinging on to, really.
I'm guessing that you know now why I was so interested in having that conversation with Mara. Whether or not you've heard about attachment styles, or whether you maybe took a psychology course back in school, it's really, to me, it's really interesting that the patterns of how we connect with people in our adult life is really determined in the first few years of our life as infants and toddlers, before we're even aware of what relationships are. And I think I want to approach this from a two-pronged perspective. I really found it encouraging that Mara talked about getting to know your own particular style and the potential for attracting a healthy partner or the potential for being attracted to more of a higher risk or an unhealthy partner is really important for us to understand. I know I have had friends that I have watched for years. I mean, I'm 60 plus now. And, I've seen some of my friends go from one not very good relationship to another not very good relationship to multiple not very good relationships. And then I've seen other people who have had a really bad series of relationships, and then they have invested in themselves. They've done some self-reflection. Maybe they've done some therapy. Maybe they've done some coaching. Maybe they've just done some reading and talking with others. And they have really changed the way that they approach relationships. And they feel really good. And now they have this phenomenal relationship with a wonderful partner. So that's the first step. And I think it's really positive that Mara works with people who maybe have that anxious attachment disorder, or maybe that they're in a relationship with somebody who's got an avoidant, or getting out of a relationship with somebody who's got an avoidant personality attachment style. And so what we're able to do, I think the positive message is that we are able to do some work on ourselves, even if we find that we are in a less than ideal state, that we are able to make some changes for ourselves. And that's what I love about this, is that it's not like you are forever going to be how you are in any kind of part of our world, whether it's our emotional, physical, mental, or spiritual, or relationship sectors of our life. We can make changes to improve our situation. So I think that's really important. And the other thing that I think is nice to think about, and I'm speaking about this specifically as somebody who was a domestic violence client advocate for many years. And I can remember sitting across the table from women who were saying, why do I keep getting into these relationships? Why am I constantly attracted to the bad boy or the bad girl who, I'm constantly chasing and they're constantly running away. And I'm always doing something, giving of myself so much into a relationship and finding myself with somebody who's willing to take it all and not give anything back. So I think that coming from that perspective, what I think is positive about this whole idea of attachment styles is that who you're attracted to in that way, or the attachment style that you naturally find yourself attracted to, is not your fault. In other words, your attachment style was formed, like we've talked about, when you were an infant and a toddler. You're not responsible for things that happen to you when you're an infant and a toddler. So I think we need to have the grace, and we need to have the confidence in saying, yes, there's a reason why my attraction system is set up this way, but it doesn't mean that I have to be stuck with it. So it kind of both of those prongs kind of come back to the center of, you really have control over how you approach relationships and education and understanding, and working with somebody like Mara, who is specifically a relationship coach that can help you get yourself in a really good space so you're confident, so you're secure in your attachment style. You're not relying on somebody else to fill a void or fill a gap. I think that old symbol of the yin and the yang, and you have to fit together to make the whole, I don't like that, because I think that says that you have to rely on somebody to be whole. And I don't believe that. I believe you can be whole yourself. I think if you can get that yin and yang relationship, you got the best of everything. But if something were to happen to the other half of that symbol, you have to be able to fill it in yourself. So if you can do that and get to that place where you're secure and you're happy in your relationship with yourself, you're going to be happy in your relationship with others. And even though I am a divorce coach, I've said this on several different things that I've talked on. It is so important that finding that if your goal is to find that relationship, then you should give yourself every tool that you have to have a wonderful relationship, because a wonderful relationship is a great way to live your life. Thanks for sharing your time with me on Undoing We. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to share it with a friend, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you're looking for some more support, be sure to grab my guide, 5 Strategies for Better Communication During Divorce and Other Life Transitions. The link is going to be in the show notes. And remember, no matter what you do today, do something special for yourself, because